Every month, millions of people experience the exact same tiny moment of pain. You work hard. You finally get paid. You open your banking app, and the number feels smaller than you expected. You look at your salary slip and see words like income tax, Social Security, federal tax, sales tax, property tax. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question quietly appears. Wait, where is all this money actually going? Because taxes feel strange. When you buy coffee, you get coffee. When you buy a phone, you get a phone. When you pay rent, you get a place to live. But taxes? You send money into a giant invisible machine, and most people never really understand what happens after that. That's why people constantly say things like, the government is wasting my money. My taxes disappear. I pay so much and get nothing back. And honestly, a lot of people feel emotionally disconnected from taxes because the benefits are often invisible. You don't directly see the roads being repaired every day. You don't notice the water systems working under the ground. You don't wake up thinking about air traffic control, public schools, firefighters, or national defense. You only notice these systems when they fail. And that's what makes taxes psychologically fascinating, because taxes are basically society's version of a subscription fee for a country. But the real story gets even more interesting, because once you understand where tax money actually goes, you also start understanding why governments borrow money, why countries can still be in debt despite collecting trillions, why some countries feel richer than others, and why people argue so emotionally about taxes in the first place. So in this video, we're going to follow your tax money step by step, from your paycheck to government budgets, to roads, hospitals, schools, military spending, debt payments, and social programs. And by the end, you'll probably never look at taxes the same way again. Most people think taxes work in a very simple way. They imagine something like this. The government collects money from everyone, puts it in one giant vault, and then spends it responsibly on useful things. But real life is much messier than that, because governments are not like normal people. If you spend more than you earn for too long, eventually you run out of money. But governments can do something ordinary people can't. They can borrow. They can print money. They can issue bonds. They can raise taxes later. And in some countries, they can even create entirely new money through central banking systems. That's why understanding taxes requires understanding one uncomfortable truth. Taxes are not just about money. They're about trust. When people trust the system, taxes feel like contribution. When people don't trust the system, taxes feel like punishment. And human psychology plays a massive role here. Researchers have found that people are actually more willing to pay taxes when they can clearly see where the money goes. That's why local taxes often feel less painful than national taxes. If your neighborhood park improves, or roads get repaired nearby, your brain creates a connection. I paid, and something useful happened. But national spending is huge and abstract. You pay a few $100s in taxes, while governments handle budgets worth trillions. The scale becomes impossible for the human brain to emotionally process. And that's when frustration starts growing, especially because most people don't realize how many different things taxes actually fund at the same time. For example, imagine a country is like a giant apartment building with millions of residents. Every month, everyone contributes money into maintenance. Now imagine what that maintenance includes: elevators, security, cleaning, electricity, water systems, emergency repairs, internet infrastructure, insurance, fire safety, management staff. Suddenly, the costs become enormous. Now scale that to an entire country with highways, airports, hospitals, courts, military systems, retirement programs, schools, police departments, scientific research, disaster relief, and public transportation. That's when you begin realizing modern countries are incredibly expensive to operate, and taxes are the fuel that keeps the system alive. But where exactly does the money go first? Let's follow it. The moment taxes leave your paycheck, they usually enter government revenue systems. Think of this like water flowing into a giant network of reservoirs. Money comes from many different sources: income taxes, sales taxes, corporate taxes, property taxes, import duties, capital gains taxes, payroll taxes. Different countries collect money differently. Some countries heavily tax income. Some tax consumption. Some rely more on businesses. Some collect massive oil revenues instead. But eventually, most of this money flows into a national budget. And this is where things get interesting. Because governments don't simply save tax money, they allocate it, which means before the year even begins, they already decide approximately where the money will go. It's basically a giant financial plan for running a country. Now here's the shocking part. In many countries, the largest chunk of tax money does not go toward flashy projects. It goes toward maintaining existing systems. That's because keeping a country functioning is far more expensive than building new things. Imagine owning an old house. Buying the house was expensive once, but maintenance never stops. Electricity, plumbing, repairs, insurance, cleaning, security. Countries work the same way. Most government spending is maintenance spending. Let's break down some of the biggest categories. In many countries, huge amounts of taxes go toward healthcare systems, pensions, unemployment benefits, disability support, and social safety nets. This category alone can consume enormous portions of national budgets. And psychologically, this is one of the biggest arguments in politics. Because people disagree on one fundamental question: how much should society help individuals? Some believe taxes should heavily support public health care, education, and welfare systems. Others believe individuals should rely more on private solutions and personal responsibility. Neither side usually thinks they are evil. They simply have different beliefs about fairness, and fairness is one of the strongest emotional triggers humans have. Behavioral psychology shows people are often willing to sacrifice money if they believe the system is fair. But if they think others are abusing the system, anger increases dramatically. That's why debates about taxes become emotional so quickly. Because taxes are not just math. They are moral conversations about responsibility, fairness, and society itself. Now imagine a government running public health care. Your taxes may help fund emergency rooms, vaccines, medical research, ambulances, healthcare workers, public health programs. Even if you personally don't use these services often, the system still needs constant funding to remain functional. It's similar to insurance. You hope you don't need it, but society wants it available when disaster happens. Another massive destination for tax money is education. Schools, teachers, universities, libraries, student programs, educational infrastructure. And this creates something economists love talking about: long-term investment. Because education spending doesn't usually create immediate results, its benefits may appear 10, 20, or even 30 years later. A child educated today becomes a worker, an entrepreneur, a scientist, a taxpayer, or an innovator later. In other words, part of your taxes are essentially investments into future economic productivity. But here's the psychological problem. Humans naturally prefer immediate rewards over delayed rewards. It's called present bias. We emotionally value short-term benefits more than future benefits. That's why voters often get frustrated with spending that doesn't create immediate visible improvements. Governments face the same problem investors face. Do you spend money now for comfort, or sacrifice now for bigger long-term returns later? Countries constantly struggle with this balance. Now let's talk about the stuff people actually see. Roads, bridges, airports, water systems, public transportation, electric grids, internet infrastructure. Infrastructure is basically the skeleton of an economy. Without it, businesses slow down, transportation becomes inefficient, productivity drops, economic growth weakens. Think about how much money disappears when roads are damaged. Deliveries become slower. Cars break down faster. Traffic increases. Fuel consumption rises. One broken bridge can impact thousands of businesses. And here's what most people don't realize. Good infrastructure quietly saves people money every single day. But because the savings are invisible, people rarely appreciate them. Humans are extremely sensitive to visible losses, but terrible at noticing invisible gains. If a pothole damages your car, you get angry immediately. But if smooth roads save you money for years, your brain barely notices. That's why governments often struggle to get appreciation for prevention spending. Preventing problems rarely creates emotional headlines. This is another enormous category in many countries. Military spending, cybersecurity, border protection, intelligence systems, emergency response systems. And even people who dislike military spending still benefit from one invisible thing: stability. Because economies need stability to function. Businesses invest when they feel safe. Markets grow when systems are predictable. Trade expands when transportation routes are secure. Security is like oxygen. You barely notice it when it exists, but you panic when it disappears. And governments spend massive amounts trying to maintain that stability. Then there's the everyday machinery of government itself. Courts, police, fire departments, public administration, regulatory agencies, tax collection systems, public records, environmental agencies. Basically, taxes also pay for the people managing the country's systems. And here's something ironic. Even tax collection itself costs money. Governments spend money to collect money, which sounds strange, but makes sense when you think about it. You need systems to process payments, detect fraud, enforce laws, handle disputes, audit corporations. A country without administrative systems would quickly become chaotic. The part most people never think about. Now, here's where things become truly surprising. A huge amount of tax money in many countries goes towards something most people never see directly: interest payments on government debt. Yes, governments themselves borrow enormous amounts of money, just like individuals, except on a gigantic scale. Here's how it works. Imagine a government collects $4 trillion in taxes, but plans to spend $5 trillion. Where does the extra trillion come from? Borrowing, usually through government bonds. Investors, banks, pension funds, and even foreign governments buy these bonds because they're considered relatively safe. But borrowed money comes with interest. And over time, interest payments themselves become massive. This creates a strange cycle. Part of today's taxes may actually go toward paying for spending decisions made years ago. And this is one reason national debt becomes such a controversial topic. Some economists argue debt is manageable if the economy keeps growing. Others worry excessive debt eventually becomes dangerous. But either way, interest payments consume real tax money, which means some of your taxes don't fund new services at all. They fund old borrowing. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because taxes are not just about paying bills. They're also about shaping behavior. Governments constantly use taxes like psychological steering wheels. For example, high taxes on cigarettes, taxes on alcohol, taxes on gambling, carbon taxes, Import taxes. Why? Because taxes can influence decisions. If something becomes more expensive, people usually do less of it. This is called incentive design, and governments use it everywhere. Meanwhile, tax breaks are used to encourage certain behaviors: buying homes, starting businesses, investing, having children, using clean energy. In other words, taxes are not only about collecting money, they're also tools for influencing society itself. And once you realize this, you start seeing taxes differently. Because governments are constantly balancing three difficult goals at once: raise enough money, keep the economy growing, and influence behavior without causing backlash. That balance is incredibly difficult. Raise taxes too much, people feel punished. Raise them too little, public systems weaken. Borrow too much, debt grows. Cut spending too aggressively, social instability increases. Every country is constantly trying to solve this impossible equation. And there's another psychological layer most people miss. People hate paying taxes immediately, but often love receiving tax-funded benefits later. This is called loss aversion. Humans feel losses more intensely than gains. So losing $500 to taxes feels emotionally painful. But receiving benefits worth far more over time often feels less emotionally powerful because the connection is indirect. For example, you might pay taxes for years without noticing anything dramatic. Then one day, an ambulance arrives during an emergency. A firefighter saves a building. A public hospital helps your family. A road system allows businesses to function. A police system protects property rights. Public schools educate future workers. Suddenly, the invisible system becomes visible. But human brains rarely connect those moments back to taxes emotionally. That's why tax conversations often become emotionally distorted. People easily see what they lose. They struggle to see what they collectively gain. Here's the deeper truth most people eventually realize. Taxes are basically the price of large-scale cooperation. That's it. A single person cannot build highways alone, or run national defense systems, or create public legal systems, or fund disaster response networks. These systems only exist because millions of people contribute together. Now, that doesn't automatically mean governments spend perfectly. Of course they don't. There is waste, corruption, inefficiency, political agendas, bad decisions. Every country struggles with these problems to different degrees, and people absolutely should question how tax money gets used. That's healthy. But the deeper idea is this: modern civilization itself depends on collective funding. Without taxes, many of the invisible systems supporting daily life would collapse. And here's something fascinating psychologically. The better a system works, the less people notice it. Think about electricity. Most people never think about the power grid until the lights go out. Same with taxes. You rarely notice functioning infrastructure, clean water, emergency systems, or transportation networks until something breaks. Successful systems become invisible, and invisibility creates underappreciation. That's one reason tax debates never fully disappear, because the benefits are often delayed, indirect, or hidden, while the costs feel immediate and personal. So what should you actually take away from all this? First, taxes are not simply money disappearing into a void. They are part of a giant system that keeps economies and societies functioning every day. Second, understanding taxes helps you understand how countries actually work. When you hear news about budget cuts, national debt, healthcare spending, education funding, inflation, or infrastructure projects, you're really hearing discussions about how collective money gets distributed. Third, it's important to separate two different conversations. Should taxes exist? And are taxes being used effectively? Those are completely different questions. Most modern economies require taxes to function, but citizens still have every right to demand transparency, efficiency, and accountability. And finally, the emotional frustration people feel about taxes is very human, because taxes create an unusual psychological experience. You feel the cost individually, but experience the benefits collectively. That disconnect makes taxes emotionally difficult to appreciate, especially because the systems they fund often become invisible when they work properly. At the end of the day, taxes reveal something surprisingly deep about human society. They reveal whether millions of strangers are willing to cooperate together for systems larger than themselves. Every road, every airport, every emergency service, every public school, every bridge, every legal system, every national safety net, all of it exists because enormous numbers of people contribute small pieces into something collective. And whether people love taxes or hate them, modern civilization as we know it depends on that cooperation. Because the truth is, the world around you is filled with invisible systems quietly working every second. Water flows, traffic lights operate, planes navigate safely, hospitals stay open, markets function, emergency services respond. Most people never think about these systems during normal life, until suddenly, one fails. And maybe that's the strangest thing about taxes. The better they work, the less you notice them. But the moment they disappear, everything changes.